So I know this is a video that a lot of you guys have probably been looking forward to. We haven't really used our calculators too much. I've been waiting for everyone to have them and have the correct charging cables. And so we are going to start to use them a lot more. I do want to start this video off though by saying that on the AP exam, you're only allowed to use your calculator on half of the test. So in this class, we're going to have certain homeworks where I say absolutely use your calculator, and other homeworks where I say don't use your calculator. Now on those homeworks, that means you want to do everything by hand first. If you want to use your calculator to help you out, maybe check an answer or get you on the right track, you can. But remember that on the tests, a lot of our tests, we're not going to use our calculator. Now that's going to be a little bit on the honor system. We'll have to kind of find a policy that works for everyone. But if you cheat and try to use your calculator on a test, if I find out, it's not going to be good, but B, the bigger thing is our goal is to pass the AP exam, right? So if you're using your calculator on every test and then all of a sudden you get to the AP exam, you're going to end up with a 1 because you don't know how to do half of the test. So, that's just kind of the preface, okay? When we turn on our calculator, one thing that I might do first is just pop over here to number 5 to settings, and I might just click number 8, restore factory default settings, because someone else had this calculator before you. They may have done things that you didn't want them to do. Okay. Now A is the calculate button, B is the graphing button. You can get to them from here, and the calculate button is where we're going to enter in our math, right? You can type in 3 plus 2 and you'll get 5. Now it does a lot more than this, but this is kind of the math part. And you don't have to go back to the home page. There's a shortcut to switch back and forth. If you hit this button underneath escape, it'll take us to the graph and we'll go back and forth. So first I'm going to talk about the graphing part of this. So the graphing part of this, and if you have anything on your page right now, like if you have old graphs from another student or you had graphed something, just testing it out, you can go to menu, go to actions, and press delete all. The other thing you might want to do is go to menu, go to window zoom, and change this to zoom standard. Okay, so now you should be on this page. And the other thing you might need to do is if there's a table, you can click on table and delete that table. But we also want to go to graph entry edit and make sure we're on number 1 function. So that's going to kind of be our initial setup. Now I also do want to just double check. Let's go to settings. And this is on float 3. I don't like float 3 because this is going to be how many digits we end up with. And on the AP exam, we always want to enter up to 4 decimal places. Well, 3 digits is definitely not going to have 4 decimal places. Even 4 digits wouldn't. So I like this number on my graph to be at least 6. So I'm going to change it to float 6 here. If you have a really big number, like in the hundreds, you may even need to remember to go in here and make it float 7 or float 8. So we're going to do this. And then for geometry, we want to change degrees to be radians. Okay, we want our degrees to be in radians. Okay, and then we'll press OK. And grid, I leave it off, but I'll just show you what a dotted grid would look like. So this would be a dotted grid. Some people prefer this, but I usually leave mine off. And you can also go in and do a lined grid, right? And so if you like this look better, that's totally fine. For me, I generally leave mine off, but it's just kind of personal preference there. Now, if you ever have a blank thing and you're trying to enter in like an equation and you keep pressing X and nothing is happening, it's because you don't have that enter option here. So the shortcut for that is to just hit tab. When you hit tab, oops. There we go. When we hit tab, it opens up this f1 of x. Now f1 of x, that's entering in a function. So you can't have a y in here. It has to be solved for the y equals part. So if we have like y equals x squared minus 9, or let's do x squared minus 4 actually. X, there's a shortcut for squared, and then minus 4. And enter, that gives us a graph. If we hit tab again, we're going to get to a new graph. Now, if we don't want a new graph, if we want to get rid of the first one, press the up arrow, and we'll go back here and we can delete it. But I'm going to hit escape so that we don't do that. Escape is kind of like cancel. If we wanted to graph a second graph with this, we could. So maybe I wanted to graph alongside of this, maybe x cubed minus 2x. And to get cubed, by the way, what we're going to do is we're going to hit the caret, right? This caret, type in cube. Now, be careful. A lot of times I'll mess this up and I'll start doing like minus 2x. If you see this, I'm still in my exponent. So anytime you use the caret, afterwards you have to click on the right arrow to bring your cursor back down. So maybe you got x cubed minus 2x plus 1. And we enter this in, and now this is our second equation. Now, if we look at the two graphs are overlapping, if we go over here and you see this hand, if you click down and hold on the hand, you can move it over. And I have a mouse, so it's easier, but you'll just be using this little kind of cursor here is like a mouse. Okay, so now we have our two equations, and we can analyze these equations. We can find zeros. We can do different things. Now, one thing we might want to do is we might want to adjust our zoom. And so sometimes you do need to adjust your zoom. And you can zoom in, you can zoom out, you can just focus on quadrant 1. You can try the zoom fit. I don't think it ever works well. There's one that's supposed to be optimized for trig. My favorite is actually to just use the window settings. And on the window settings, in this case, we're zoomed pretty well. But if we wanted to zoom in a little bit, like if we want to zoom around here, what we can kind of look at is this is -1, 2, 3, 4, maybe around 5. And on the x and the y's, we really only need to go up to about 2 or 3, and maybe on the y go up about 3. So a really good one that I like is in window zoom is this window settings. And we really want to get familiar with this. So this says, what is the minimum x? A lot of times I'll go with -10 and +10, but here maybe we'll just go with -4 and +4. We want to zoom in a little bit. And our minimum y, maybe I want to make as, say same thing, -4 and +4. And we can scale with autos, or we can scale by 1. I usually leave it as auto, unless I'm really only doing something small, and then I might change it to 1. So now this shows me a little bit of a more zoomed in graph. If I see, hey, this looks like it's a little bit cut off, we can go to menu, and instead of making that down at -4 for the y, maybe I'll make my y -5. If you want it to be a box, like a square, then you could change this to be +5 as well. But it doesn't have to be square. So I left mine. So now we're zoomed in a little bit. And then if we go to menu, we can go here to trace and hit graph trace. I like graph trace a lot because what graph trace allows you to do is just type in any value. Like say I type in 1, and then it tells me that my y value is -3, or 3/2. It tells me that when f of 1 is 1.5, the y value is -1.75. If you press the up and down arrows, this will switch between the two, right? So that's how we would evaluate a point. We can also go to menu and go to analyze graph, and it gives us a lot of different options. Minimum value, find our zeros. For the zeros, we can only do them one at a time. Now first it's going to ask us which graph. You're going to just click on it. Do we want F2 or do we want F1? I'm going to pick F2. Now it's going to say the lower bound. The lower bound means go to the left of the 0 you want, right? There are 3 zeros here. So if I wanted this 0, I'm going to need to go to the left of it. If I wanted this 0, I'm going to need to go to the left of it. I'm going to choose this rightmost 0 and kind of show you is if I want the rightmost 0, I need to make sure to go to the left of it, but not so far that I go to the left of the other one. So I just want to go to the left of just that guy, so somewhere around here. Now the upper bound means go to the right of it. So I'm going to go to the right of it, and now it's going to tell me where that 0 is. It's at 1. Okay? And if we did it for the next one, so analyze graph, and then we're going to go to analyze graph, go to 0, and I want graph 2 again. I'm going to go to the left of this one and the right. The reason I'm showing this one is it overlaps. We're going to want to just use that arrow, right, and grab our text. Just move it so it's readable. But this is why I specifically chose that float 6, right? So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 significant digits. The leading zeros never count as a significant digit. But we have 6 digits, and so I like making that float 6. That way, on the AP exam, I can write 0.6180 out to 4 decimals. And then if we need to find the third one, we can find the third one. Now, there will be faster ways to do this that we'll learn later on, but this is just one way to do that. And so if we want to get rid of everything, menu, actions, and we can delete everything. And it'll say, yeah, do you want to delete everything? Yes. I do want to show us one last thing with the graph, is on graph entry edit, we're almost always going to stay on function. But every now and then, we will use a couple of these other ones. And one that I like is relation. Relation, it doesn't have the f of x. It says relation x comma y. We're going to use x and y. And so the advantage of relation, we can still type in like y equals x squared minus 4, and it works. But what relation allows us to do is if we hit the tab to enter a second one, it allows us to do things that are not functions. So say x squared plus y squared equals 4. And if you know what this graph is, this is the graph of a circle, and it's a circle with radius 2. So this does not look like a circle, and the reason mine doesn't look like a circle is because of my zoom. Right? I didn't have it zoomed correctly. So if we change our zoom to actually just be our standard zoom, you'll see that it is a circle, right? But because I had that -5 and +4, we were kind of zoomed in a funky way, so it didn't look like a circle. So that's why it's important to when you do the zoom, right? I could actually keep that, what I had before. It was -4, +4, -5, and +4. And it's important to realize, hey, this isn't actually what it might look like. So what I like to try to do if I'm doing my own is, instead of doing -5 and -4, is to always use the opposite. Like -5, let's use +5. And that still doesn't look like a circle because we had -5 and -4. So if we change this now to be more of a square shape, now it should look more like a circle. Mine still isn't. I guess it might be because of the auto. They might be counting differently. So I don't know, we'll have to look into that. Maybe if we change this to 1. Counting by 1. And oops. Okay, that's why. So they're forcing us to scale this differently, so that's why. So just be aware of that your shapes might not always look correct, but if you change it to like our standard zoom, then now it does look correct. So anyways, that's pretty much everything we want to do on the graph side. Now, what I do want you guys to do is, just because I'm going to show you the way that these connect, and that's really cool, is go to Actions, if you're following along, click Delete All, press Yes, and go to Tab, Tab, or first we're going to change this back over to function. You mostly want to be on function, and I'm going to show you why you want to be on function. So we're on function. Let's just type in x cubed minus 2x plus 1, hit enter. And so now we have this function, and this function is named f1 of x. Now we're going to click this button above tab below escape. That's going to take us over to our graph. And I'm going to show you something really cool. Is as we start to type, like if we type 3x, everything's in italics. But if we type an f, it starts off in italics. As soon as I hit F1, it's bold. Now if I click F2, it's not bold. F3, not bold. And the reason for that is we didn't graph in F2, we didn't graph in F3, but we did graph in F1. So as soon as we do F1, it bolds it to tell us, hey, this is something that the calculator has stored information about. If I hit F1, nothing's going to happen, it's going to give me an error. But if I do F1 parentheses x of x, now it's going to say, hey, F1 of x was equal to x cubed minus 2x plus 1. And we can now, here we can type in numbers very fast, like F1 of 0.5, F1 of 0, we should get 1 because it's the y-intercept, F1 of 2. And so we can use this to type in test points very quickly. Like when we're doing tangent lines x1, y1, and m, you could use this. So that's a pretty neat feature. Now, in our calculator, there's, same thing how we did that setup. I want to do that setup before we move on. So go to Doc, go down to number 7, Settings, go to Document Settings, and we're on Float 6. Float 6 is nice. For this side, a lot of times I like to even be a little bit higher than that. So if you want, you could go to Float 9 or even max it out to Float 12. I'm going to go to Float 12 just for right now. But anywhere between 6 and 12 is good. Basically, if you ever need more decimals, just change the float. If it only gave you 2 or 3 decimals, increase your float. Then make sure your radian is set to, your angle is set to be on radians. That's very important. Then you can press OK. So now we have that set up. And a lot of the tools we're going to use are in menu. So in menu, if we go to actions, there's a clear A to Z. This deletes all the variables. There's also clear history. This deletes everything that you see on the screen. So if I hit clear history, it'll get rid of everything there. Now it doesn't clear the graph, it just clears this screen. So those are important, and we'll kind of get there. And the variables we'll get there. We can store variables to do things. But we're going to go to menu, and let's go to number. And on number, we can convert to decimals, approximate to fractions, factor things, and these are all number tools. So then in algebra, we have solve, we have factor again, we have expand, we have zeros, and one that I use a lot is solve system of equations. So we're going to use these a lot. So I'll just show us really quickly, like the factoring tool. If we wanted to factor like x squared minus 2x, maybe minus 3, it'll factor it for us. If we want to expand it, we can go to menu, algebra, expand, and we can, my cursor is right here in the middle. What you can actually do is if you press the up key, you can do one of two things. You can go to Control C, and you can come down and into the back here and click Control V. Or the other thing that I like to do even better that's quicker is if, again, our cursor has to be in there. If we press the up key, when it's highlighted, if we just press enter, it'll bring it down. So we can hit enter, and that brings that down. So that's really neat. Another thing we can do is that if we wanted to evaluate this, instead of typing it into a graph, what we can do is, I could come up here, hit enter, it's going to bring it down. And we can press Control equals, and we can use this at. This, greater than, less than, greater than or equal to, less than or equal to, not equal to. This is to evaluate at. So when I click this, it's going to say evaluate this at, and then we can press x equals 1. So that's like saying plug in x equals 1. If we go the up arrow twice and hit enter, it's going to bring it down, and we can change the 1 to 2. Go up again, change it to 3. And so we can evaluate a lot of different points very quickly. That's something that can be helpful. Okay, in menu, there's also an algebra solve. Solve is probably one of the most used buttons, features that we're going to use on our calculator ever. Now on solve, there are a few things we have to be aware of. You have to have an equal sign, but you also have to set it up to tell it what you want to solve for. So we might say we want to solve x squared minus 2x minus 3 equal to 0. If I just hit enter, I'm going to get an error. You always need to tell it what variable you want to solve. And the way you do that is after your equation, you put a comma, and then you type in the variable. So comma x, we want to solve it for x. And so they tell us the answer is x equals -1 or x equals 3. Now when we're doing trig, it's going to get a little bit nasty with solve, so I want to show you that very quickly as well. Is when we click on our solve button, let's say we wanted to know when is cosine of x. And actually, if I do cosine of x, see how it's all in italics? Whereas if I just had cosine, it's not italics. That's important. Don't ever type in cosine x with the keyboard. You actually always want to go to the trig and type in cosine, because that'll put the parentheses for you. You can type in and use parentheses, but using the trig is actually a lot better. So cosine of x, say, is equal to, maybe we want to know when it's equal to square root of 2 over 2. And actually, I'll show this right now as well. To get the dividing to look pretty, what you can do is you can do control divide, and that makes it look pretty with the fraction bar. So I want it to be square root of 2 over 2. So when is cosine of x equal to square root of 2 over 2? And then comma x. Now, if you're thinking on the unit circle, the correct answers would be pi over 4 and 7 pi over 4. But when I hit enter, we're not going to get that. We're going to get some weird 8 times n minus 1, n1 minus 1 times pi over 4, or 8 n1 plus 1 times pi over 4. And the reason for this is, if you guys remember the graph of sine of x and cosine of x, they basically go on and on forever. So what's happening is there are an infinite amount of times when cosine of x will be equal to square root of 2 over 2. And n1 is just saying to plug in an integer. You use 1, you could use 2, you could use 3, you could use 4, you could use 5, you could use 6. It's just going to give you all of the different answers. So what we want to do is we want to tell the calculator only use from 0 to 2 pi. So the way we do this is that after we've put the comma x, this is important, you don't do this inside the parentheses. You have to do this outside of the parentheses. So after the comma x, you go outside the parentheses, and we do that control equals, we do that at, that let's evaluate it at. Now, we don't want to do in one spot, we want to do an interval. We want to say from 0, so when 0, and then we're going to do control equals again, is less than or equal to x, and then control equals again is less than or equal to 2, and then the pi button is down here below the EE is this pi button. And there's some other buttons here just so you can see. There's an E button, there's a theta button here, there's an infinity button here, there's a degree symbol. So, but we're going to just choose pi. And so what this is going to do is it's going to resolve it, but this time they're only going to look at between 0 and 2 pi. And so now we get the answer we were looking for, pi over 4 and 7 pi over 4. So what you can kind of remember for yourselves is anytime you're doing trig and you see this weird n1 symbol, it's just be like, oh yeah, I have to put in the interval. I have to put in between 0 and 2 pi. So that kind of took us through all of the menu algebra that we're going to use. Okay, we're not going to really get into probability, statistics, any of that stuff. If you're taking the SAT, you could worry about that. But we are going to worry about the calculus tab. Now, there's a tangent line function, a normal line function that's kind of helpful, and I'll talk about that later, but I don't want you to over-rely on that because on the AP exam, you cannot use your calculator to do that, but we'll talk about that later. But I actually don't really ever use this calculus tab. I use the shortcuts, and we'll see those. But you can use these if you get stuck. You can click on derivative, or you can click on derivative at a point, and it'll help you out. But what I do is I actually use this button over here. Now, before I get to this button, I do want to talk about this book. The book has every single function that we're ever going to need. So on the book, at the top of the book, has ABS would be absolute value, right? And what it'll do is inside here, it'll tell you what it wants. It'll say it wants an expression. That means something without an equation, right? Or it might say on some of these, let's find one. Actually, let's go down to solve. If I go to S and we go find solve, right? Because if you ever get stuck, like you're like, hey, what am I supposed to put for solve? If we have solve, it'll tell you it wants the equation, which means equation is with an equal symbol, and then comma, it wants the variable. If we go all the way to the bottom, it'll also have a, go to A and then scroll up. So if we go all the way to the bottom, or you go to A and then go, hit up to go here, it'll also have some just symbols that can be used. And so the book literally has everything your calculator can do. So if you ever really can't find something, you can look in the book. Okay, and these other tabs have some more interesting things. This has, we're going to find the shortcut for this, but this is a lot of the calculus items. And these are kind of organized, so organized by different categories. But again, I don't really use this book. I don't use the catalog a lot because I remember where to find everything. But to me, the most helpful calculus button is just to the left of the book. So you'll see it has an absolute value symbol. And this looks kind of like a piecewise symbol. And this, if we click on this guy, this has pretty much everything we could want for calculus. It has the dividing, the quick divide, which again, I use control divide, but you can use this. This is for exponents. So if you wanted to click this, it would, now here it does put an answer, so it puts your last thing. But it has two boxes, a box for x squared. Now I don't ever use that, I just use the caret, but it's there just to see it. It has square root, but then it also has, and again, I don't use square root, I use control. The square root's right there. But it also has the, like for a cube root, it has the e to the button, has the absolute value button. If you ever need to like do the absolute value of x, you can do that, like absolute value of x, right? And then more importantly is these starting right here. So this is the first derivative, the second derivative. Remember how we had a question a few weeks back with like find the 400th derivative of cosine of x? You could do that. And these guys we're going to get to later. These are antiderivatives. And we also have the limit. So, we already did our limits chapter, but the limit as x approaches 3, maybe from the right side. And then if I go to control divide, that makes it look pretty. I've say 2x divided by 3 minus x. This is a vertical asymptote. And so on the right side, it's going down to negative infinity. If I went up here, highlighted it, hit enter, we had changed the plus side from the right side. Instead of the right side, we could say, what about on the left side? It's going to positive infinity. If I come back here again, if I get rid of the minus and I just leave it blank, that's going to be both sides. Well, if one side is negative infinity, the other side is positive infinity, that means the overall will be undefined. So that's pretty neat, and we can do those limits. Now, for derivatives, right, we're going to mostly just use this first derivative, right? But every now and then you might need to do the second derivative or a different one. But for the first derivative, we'll notice it's in the notation that it wants the derivative with respect to what variable. Most of the time we're going to put x here. And then here we're going to type in the derivative we want. So maybe we want the derivative of x squared plus 2x or 3x minus 4. And then we just hit enter, and it tells us it's 2x plus 3. And it'll do all the hard derivatives for us, but every now and then, it might over simplify it. So just be careful about that. But it could do quotient rule, x squared plus 4, maybe even quotient rule with like a chain inside of it, so sine of 2x, and then it'll write out our derivative that way, which is very neat. The other thing it can do is it can do a derivative at a point. And so I usually type these in manually, and I'll show you how to do it both ways. But let's say we wanted to know the derivative of x squared plus 3x minus 4, but they wanted to know like f prime of 4. Well, we're going to do that control equals, that same way we did it before. We're going to go to that at, make sure this is outside of your parentheses, after your parentheses, at maybe x equals 4, like f prime of 4. Now, I want to be very careful that you put it outside your parentheses. If you put this inside your parentheses, it's always going to give you 0. Do not put it inside your parentheses. The reason it's going to give you 0 is it's going to first plug in 4 here, like 16 plus 12 minus 4. It's going to give you like 24, and the derivative of 24 is always 0. So always never put this inside, always put it outside. This gives us, this line here gave us f prime of 4. Right, now let's go back to our graph. Remember we had our graph was f1 of x. Right, we could also even do the derivative of f1 of x. So we could say, what is the derivative with respect to x of f1 of x? Or we could say, if we wanted f prime of 4, we could do at, so control equals, at x equals 4, that would do f prime of 4. So very neat. If you ever forget about this at or how to do this at, if you go to menu, calculus, if you click derivative at a point, it'll kind of walk you through it. So our variable is x, maybe we want to plug in f prime of 3. We want the first derivative, we'll press OK. And it basically filled that out for us with the at. And so that will kind of remind you, oh yeah, that's how I did it. So, maybe x minus 2. And we just get 1 because the derivative of x is 1. So when you plug in 3 to 1, it's still 1. So that's a lot of, pretty much our basics. It was a lot, but that was a lot of the basics. There is a way to store variables. I don't like to do that, but there is a way to store variables, and that's, if we did 3 control variable, I typed in 2 control variable, like say y. Now whenever I type in x, it's in italics, but if I type in y, it's bold. If I type like y plus 2, now we get 5. Y squared, we get, y plus 2 is 4. I did 2, not 3. Y squared is 4. And so that will do that. But now the issue is you can't really do any equations because it's stored as 4. So I'm going to go to Menu, Actions. I'm going to clear A to Z. This is going to delete all of my variables. And so now we don't have any variables. So now when I type in y again, it just gives me back y. So I don't like to use variables to store my stuff and plug things in. I like to actually use this @ symbol because it just says only when x equals 4, just for this one line. But then now x, it didn't save it as 4. It just did it for that one line. Right, I think that's mostly everything. We talked about the pi button. Right, the control button gets us to everything in blue. I think that should be obvious. Escape is kind of like cancel. Right, and then we have our square root is control there. We have e to the x is right here. Control would give us ln of x. Another thing I do want to point out that I've seen a lot of students mess up on, 2 things. These will be kind of our last 2 things. Will be is as soon as you press this negative symbol, that's negative. So if I wanted -6, we do that symbol, -6. Right, what a lot of students accidentally do is they use the minus. Minus is not negative. So if I do -6, what this is actually doing, you see it put in the answer. This is saying answer means what you had back up here. So they're going to say answer -6 and you'll get -12. So be very careful. If you want -6, don't use the minus symbol, use the negative symbol. So that's for our negative. And another thing I see a lot of students mess up on is the trig. A question will look like sine squared of x. It'll look like this, sine squared of x. And if you try to enter that, it's going to give you an error, right? It will never ever work. Like even if I wanted the sine squared of like plug in 0, it's not going to work, right? The reason for that is what this really means is this means sine of 0 squared out here, and you need to write it like that in your calculator. Your calculator will not allow you to put the squared right next to the sign. You have to put it in a parentheses around the sign. Right now the sign is 0, 0, 0 squared is 0. But that's something that I've seen a lot of students mess up on, just a couple common things. Then I guess the last thing I do want to point out is, let's say we had menu, let's say we were solving for something a little bit more complicated, and your calculator literally solve anything. So say like x cubed minus 48x squared plus 31x minus 17 equals 28. Now comma x, we always need that comma x. Now it's going to give me a decimal, and if you want to use that decimal later, it's very important, do not round in your intermediate steps. Only round at the very end. So what you're going to want to do is, if we wanted to use this decimal, you might want to do like the @ say we wanted to do like something with that decimal, like we wanted to add 50 to that, like x plus 50, and then do the @ and then come up here and just grab the whole thing. That way it doesn't round it for you. Or you can also just come up here and just kind of do control, like highlight. So if you hold down the shift key and then start hitting left, oops, you gotta hold down shift. I think on your calculator you can just press shift once. So you're going to hold down shift and hit left, and then you can hit control C. Now that's copied, and so whenever you hit control V, it's going to just copy that full number for you. So that's another just tidbit that I do want to point out with this. And then one last thing, this will be the very last thing, will be a lot of times a question will want a decimal answer, but you'll have it as a fraction. So like on multiple choice, they might want a decimal, and every time you type it in, you keep getting, 17, or let's say like 51, oops, where are we? like 51 divided by 18, and it just keeps writing 17/6. You enter, it's like 17/6, and you're like, I want that to be a decimal. There are two ways you can do this. You can hit Control Enter. So when you hit Control Enter, it'll then say force this to be a decimal. So Control Enter will force a decimal. The other thing you can do is if you just put a decimal in a point somewhere, it'll also force it to be a decimal. So if it sees a decimal point, it'll make it a decimal, or if you hit Control Enter, that'll force it to be a decimal. That's actually something that's very, very common. Probably one of the more common things that happens. So anytime you have anything with a fraction and you're like, wait, I just want it as a decimal, hit Control Enter. So I know this is a long video, but there's a lot of stuff on our calculator that we can do. And I have basically just scratched the surface of it. But you know, there are a ton of YouTube videos out there that'll go more into depth. Make sure that you search for TI Nspire CAS. Okay, you can drop the CX2 part, but search, you know, TI Nspire CAS, and you can look at a ton of YouTube videos for how to do more interesting things. This calculator does so much, and we'll do a few more lessons along the way with our calculators, but hopefully this was a good intro into how to use your calculator.